everybody, and thank you for joining in on our session, Democratizing Science Through Wonder and Awe. So we hope that this will be a workshop for considering what we value for science education and engagement. We've been exploring these topics. More recently, the concepts of wonder and awe as a mechanism to try to think about our roles in implementing strategies that promote DEIJ and best practices, and just seeing how this topic can really help bridge some of the disconnects. So we're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves. We thought we'd sort of make it a little bit light and airy. I'm Jeanne Garbarino. I am the director of RockEDU Science Outreach, and my email is here. And if I had to choose some characters that I feel are my spirit animals, it would be Louise from Bob's Burgers, Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek, and of course, Lilith Sternin from Frasier. Those are my favorites. I'll hand it over to my co-facilitator, DeSanne.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm DeSanne Davis, and I chose Miss Frizzle as both a scientist and a teacher, as well as the Swedish chef.
So yeah, please feel free to jot down our emails, and we'll share those also in the chat so you can get in touch with us if you need to after this. So, all right. So we both work for RockEDU Science Outreach, which is the centralized science outreach office of Rockefeller University. And Rockefeller University is a biomedical research institute on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We only train PhD, so we don't have like an undergraduate campus or anything, just to give you a little bit of context of our setting. Our mission is to create and support science outreach frameworks that help to bring together scientific and non-scientific communities so that we can simply promote an appreciation for the process of science. We're not necessarily interested in generating, I know we just came from a keynote that was very centralized on the concept of workforce development. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is a little bit counter to that concept, because we're not interested in necessarily creating an army of future scientists, but more showcasing the genuine ways that science can be connected with society, we think for the greater good. So our major audiences, we have 4 major audiences. That's K through 12 students, mostly in the New York City Department of Education. We work very, very closely with active scientists, mostly from the Rockefeller University, Weill Cornell, and Memorial Sloan Kettering campuses, though sometimes we work with scientists from other New York City institutions. But we put forth a bunch of initiatives that support mentorship education, cultural competency, and sort of just general engagement practice and teaching practice as well. We work very closely with K through 12 teachers in the New York City Department of Education, and sometimes from other school districts, mostly through our collaborations with Math for America, which is a professional development, professional learning community for math and science teachers in New York City. And we are also really interested in creating resources and serving as a hub to the best of our ability for the science engagement community. So we're keen on sharing our learnings broadly. So you'll see we have a website. Well, you won't see because we're not sharing it, but we do have a website where we're putting everything out as Creative Commons. And so we're encouraging the science. We hope that the materials that we have, both in terms of content and practice, can be utilized by the scientific engagement community. And we're also working on networking with people through other types of gatherings. So, all right. You can go to the next slide. All right, so that's just a little bit about us, but really what we want to jump into is how wonder can be leveraged to think about advancing our own missions of our own programs, and also to best serve our individual audiences. And so the goals of this session is to first share what we've learned so far. This has been a very fascinating topic and a set of explorations for us at RockEDU, and we are excited to share the shifts, we've really gone through some serious paradigm shifts in the last couple of, I would say the last 2 years, if not even more so the last couple of months, and we're just stoked to share that with you all, with hope that it could be valuable for your work, and to showcase some of the practical ways to infuse these wonder-based paradigm shifts in your own work. Okay, so that's the goals of the session. You can go to the next slide. All right. So we're gonna, looks like we have a nice amount of people. We're gonna separate everybody into some breakout rooms, and we're gonna just set some expectations by asking you to, once you're in a breakout room, to select a note taker and a share out person. And we're gonna ask you to work directly in our slide deck. So we're gonna give you the PowerPoint in the link. We'll give you the chat, the link to the PowerPoint slides for the Google slide deck in the chat. And please note that Jeanne put a comment in the chat around if you need closed captioning in your breakout room, please reply to her directly and she'll make sure that that capacity is available to you. So we're gonna label the breakout rooms in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're gonna go to the slide that aligns with your breakout number, introduce yourselves, and then just start talking about, you know, why do you teach science? All right, so I'm gonna randomly assign 3 breakout rooms, I think, for the amount of people that we have. And if there's any finagling for closed captioning, do let us know. I'm gonna open all rooms and again, go to the number breakout room 1, breakout room 2, or breakout room 3. That's on your, that you'll see the slide. Hopefully it's made, it makes sense to you. Let me know if you have questions. So we're gonna go there for about 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. Fun to see some of the notes pouring into the slides. You can take a look. Does anybody want to share out for your group some of the key things that you discussed about why each of you teach science?
I'm happy to start. I was group 3, if it's okay to go out of order.
Sure.
I think our slide, let's see, Courtney took really great notes, which people can read, but kind of what we all felt like is we all want to create an infectious desire to make science seem fun, and to engage kids to feel how or to appreciate how important science is for their lives, whether or not they have a life that's as a scientist or not, because you're making science-based decisions your entire life. You know, things you buy, the medical decisions you make for yourself, people you vote for. And so just getting kids to see that science is fun and the scientific process can be followed in many different ways. A bunch of people in our group had 4-H experience, including one who runs a 4-H program that does outreach. And so we talked a little bit about how that kind of hands-on life experience is really lends itself very well to scientific learning.
I could quickly talk about what we did in room 1. So we had someone mentioning teaching at community colleges. We find that a lot of times they're the group that falls through the cracks. So there are a lot of like K-12 outreach, and there's a lot of college, right? And then there's like this gap between like, what about those that are transitioning, especially thinking about international students, people who don't have the resources to go straight to a 4-year college or university. And so teaching at that place is their ability to kind of showcase what science is, and also to introduce them to like jobs in science. I know a lot of times we teach not to like get students to have a job, but like when you think about certain communities, they have to work, right? So how can we provide them the tools at the same time while we're teaching them to give them the opportunity to make money? Also, on my end, it was just showing in certain communities that science is exciting and it's not this laborious topic that like you have to memorize and regurgitate, but it's something that can be applied to your everyday life, similar to what I think Kitty was mentioning. And so just showcasing how science is relevant, trying to like undo the current teaching in schools where it's just like to memorize to pass a test, but more so understanding like how it applies to your everyday life. Science is all around us. And I think when we start doing so, we allow for people to gain critical thinking skills and the ability to apply even if they don't go into STEM. And I think the other person in our group was talking about like in rural communities, just having the opportunity to expose them to science that they may not necessarily have, but also just to showcase diversity in science in terms of jobs and opportunities for a lot of these students.
I can speak.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
So we talked a lot about really the the engagement of students and how fun it is to engage with them and to show them how to engage with science as well. Cheryl brought up that science is everywhere. It's super versatile. So that's one thing that's great about it, is that you can teach so many different science in so many different subjects and different ways through different subjects. And Mitch talked about how exciting it is to inspire students to know that they can take that inspiration and pass it on to other students, keep the engagement going, right? If you're engaged and excited to teach science, it can engage and keep those students engaged. And the same for me, really. It's that, like I said, the look of awe and wonder when a kid figures out that they can create something, that they have that agency to do something or make something. That's what keeps me loving teaching science.
This has all been really wonderful and incredible, and I'm so happy to hear the amount of people who are looking to teach, because it just feels good to do that, right? And it feels good to engage with students around something so wonderful like science, something around science or technology. So I think we're gonna jump into a little bit of our content for this workshop. So before we move into the next sort of hands-on, I don't know what else to call it these days. You know, I'm actually a little bit curious, because we just came from this big keynote around workforce development, yet very few comments. I think Odelis, you mentioned one thing about showcasing diversity of careers, but that wasn't necessarily in the spirit of workforce development. That was just sort of like, hey, you should know what's out there, right? So I find that fascinating, and I also wonder if it actually reflects the idea that, you know, we have this narrative, and I understand why people feel nervous about this. It sort of clicked for me a little bit more today than ever. But really, only 6.2% of the jobs in the United States are STEM related, right? We have 300 million people here in the United States, many more elsewhere. A fraction of these jobs are STEM related. Is that the reason why we should be, you know, is that the primary reason we should be talking about why we should teach science? And we are going to make the argument that it's no, it's not, right? And we also have come to many conclusions based on our conversations with students, conversations with teachers, and our own experiences as laboratory scientists. Everyone in the RockEDU team comes from a laboratory or field background. And we find that when we are working with students based on their schoolwork, it doesn't reflect anything like what science is like in real life versus what they're taught in the classroom. And there's this really, really big disconnect, right? So I think, you know, for the next point, if you don't mind clicking, all right, and we can also consider the idea that, you know, not only are people, the only exposure they have to science is sort of really inaccurate in terms of what science is all about, right? And so people are only spending a fraction of their time in school learning about science, and it's not even the real stuff, right? And so we've come, with all of this, we sort of are coming to this argument more and more that science is really, it's more about a cultural achievement, and it's really about the emotions of science that impact us. And that's what we can find as the unifying principle of science. And it's not, yes, cool, we're gonna create STEM jobs, cool, we're gonna, you know, we're gonna learn more stuff in school. But really it's that unifying, like, human emotion. And how can we talk about that? And we've already had this as a huge example. Like, does everybody have a knee-jerk reaction to that little icon that just popped up? Because I sure do. Like, we all know what this means now, right? And this isn't eliciting an emotional reaction for us. And we think that's worth diving into in deeper ways.
So in that context, as we start to think about what science is and how we might engage with it, we think it's important to acknowledge that science is both a process and a set of knowledge, and those two interplay constantly with each other. So science as a process is the how that we generate information. It's science being iterative, it's development, testing, and then it's sort of the scientific community, but also the general community's approval of such explanations. And that's a part of the process of gaining new knowledge and building that into the set of content knowledge that we hold collectively. And so this body of scientific knowledge that we hold is our best current explanation of the natural world. It includes facts, theories, laws, models. It includes the ways that we categorize and classify things. It includes the way that we look at things. And this set of knowledge and the process by which we gain new knowledge are constantly in flux with each other. We're constantly revising our explanations of the natural world. And so I think it's really interesting to think about how both of those things can be taught and how both of those things can play a role in the way that we share science with others. And then I really wanted to emphasize that even when we're talking about this process and this knowledge, that the science that we're talking about exists on the personal level, it exists on the cultural level, it exists within each scientific discipline, sort of independently and interconnectedly. And all of these different layers have different ways of organizing their knowledge and talking about their knowledge. And so I share here one very specific example that I just find really interesting and maybe evokes wonder for me. This is called a Lukasa, and it's a memory device that indigenous communities used before humans were literate, before we recorded our knowledge in books. And this was a way that a community might record information that was really vital and important to their livelihoods or to their environment. A device like this includes patterns of beads, and the people who use it will actually move their fingers around on the board as a physical memory cue of these different items or objects that they're remembering. And it might hold something like the hundreds of insects in your community, and they categorize and classify them in such a way that there's a combinatorial pattern of the different insects in a community, or different farming practices, or different pieces of information important to a particular community. And I think it's just such a visual way of thinking about how there's the what of the knowledge, but there's also the how of even the knowledge, right? What is it? How do we organize it? How do we update it? And it's a living thing that lives within ourselves and our cultures.
Yeah, so I love the memory palace, and just as a Eurocentric example of that is like Cicero, when he would make these big speeches, it's how it was smooth. They created this memory palaces in there, and where there were these objects that held the information. Visualizing these objects allowed him to recall what the speech component was. So. And so we want to draw your attention to the idea of the role wonder plays in the process of scientific discovery by just reading to you the reflections from very famous scientists and philosophers. So it was through the feeling of wonder that men now and at first began to philosophize, and that's by Aristotle. Most people who went to school probably know who that is. Rachel L. Carson is one of my favorite naturalists and environmentalists of last century. If facts are the seeds that later produce knowledge and wisdom, then the emotions and the impressions of the senses are now fertile soil in which the seeds must grow. Then we have something from Neil Armstrong: mystery creates wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand. The next quote is by someone who I actually personally despise, and Jeanne and I went back and forth on whether or not to include this quote. So I will say that this guy's a misogynist, but this is a very good point. I'm going to take it for what it's worth. Far from science not being useful, my worry is that it is so useful as to overshadow and distract from its inspirational and cultural value. Usually, even its sternest critics concede the usefulness of science while completely missing the wonder. So this is putting utility at the expense of wonder, which I think is much more succinct, Richard Dawkins anyway. And then our last one is from Donna Strickland, who won the Nobel Prize for her work in physics. Science is about wondering why, not about knowing the answers. And I want to expand upon Donna Strickland's interview in her Nobel Prize. It's like nobelprize.org is where this is from. And I'm gonna leave you to read, give you, you know, unless somebody would like for me to read this out loud, I'm just gonna leave this to read. And I do want to point you to the sort of the second paragraph, and I'd love for you to just take a moment and absorb that. So we don't have the answer. We have to have the right questions. It's flipping the issues on their head. It's sort of like the Jeopardy of science. You start with the question, with, you know, well, what do you start with? The question. Yeah, what is da da da, right? So I don't know, maybe that was not the smoothest of analogies, but maybe we'll go to the next slide.
So with that, we wonder, where does wonder intersect with science education, and how can we leverage this in our own work? And so we have looked through, you know, several education research papers and several different dimensions looking at various contexts for thinking about wonder. And one of them started with sort of this framing in a more general science education context of several dimensions, sort of look-fors in a scientific education program. And so you can take a look at these, and I'm curious for you to put a number in the chat first for how many of these do you think you foster in your program? It doesn't have to be a central goal, but things that you think, and your program can be thought of broadly, any sort of outreach, teaching, engagement that you're involved in. Thank you for all of you sharing. If you want, you could add in if there's some that feel particularly challenging or particularly resonant with you. We'd love to see those in the chat as well, as we're getting a few more descriptions in here. I love this. And so now, building on that, these could be the same or they could be different. We're curious, how many of these different look-fors do you think touch on emotions like wonder? Whether or not you use them directly in your program. Okay, a few people are saying all of them. A few people are saying kind of a majority of them. Yeah, so there might be some variations in how these play out. But I think it is interesting to think about what these all might look like with an emotional component involving emotions such as wonder or related emotions.
So I think, you know, I want to draw off of the comment that Kitty made, and that was that, you know, 10, but not necessarily all 10 in any one program, right? And I think this idea of having dimensionality is really important when we're thinking about wonder. We're not going to be able to do all things in all sessions and have all of the emotions. Otherwise, it's just going to be emotional overload for all of us, right? And so I think it's what the point we want to make here, and this is from a paper that is referenced from Milna, and it's essentially that over the course of learning, over the course of our lives, we can go through, you know, time experiencing a multi-dimensional feelings of emotions and awes, right, and experiences, and sometimes that leads to us going super deep, and sometimes it just leads to us having like an appreciation for something. You know, it doesn't always have to end up with like, I'm really interested in this thing, therefore I'm going to become a mathematician, right? It's not really about that. It's more of like, I can see and find science and STEM around me through this inspirational feeling that I'm getting, right? And and so, you know, you could see that this could be in you know, beauty or mathematical or spiritual or curiosity. Maybe it's a combination of those things at one given point, or in one period of time it's this, and another period of time it's that, right? And so some examples of that. So if you can advance to the next slide. For me, these are my examples of how I feel about where I'm drawn, right? And on the left are two art pieces by one of my favorite artists, Hilma F. Klint, who painted in the early 1900s, was sort of before her time. And And I just love I love thinking about geometry and intersections and lines, and it's not necessarily something that's going to turn me into a mathematician, but it is something that is very a mathematical experience that elicits this wonder and awe in me, and I it gets me really thinking about the intersection of art and science, right, in these really deep and philosophical ways. So I think that really sparks that inside of me. And then on the realm of personal enjoyment, I've been raising with our team, we've been making this project of raising silkworms, and I've literally like just have come to love doing this, rearing them and figuring out their biology and understanding how they work, and making my mom take a look at her grandworms every single day. You know, like I just love these things, right? And I'm learning so much as a result, and they're really sparking curiosity for me. So those are some examples for me.
Wonderful. And I pulled a couple examples to draw on some different types of emotional experiences. In terms of beauty, I had a really hard time. I was thinking plants and roots, and then I was thinking Ramoni Cajal, and then I realized that they're also beauty because they're almost the same. And there's also a beauty and a magic in the natural world in the ways that these patterns reproduce themselves. So I ended up pulling up this picture, but even to represent broader things than just recording of scientific information, but also the beauty and the patterns that it elicits. And then a very current one for me that just stands out so strongly in this feeling of wonder is the day that Pfizer released their data on the vaccine trial. And I remember this graph first appearing. And then I remember talking to all my scientist friends, and every time we would look at it, it would like bring tears to our eyes. Because for probably 15 years now, I've been trained in fields that talk about the drug discovery and delivery pipeline and the 10-year process that is involved in making a new drug or a new vaccine, and the money that's involved and the complexity that's involved. And then to realize that this whole process happened in a year. And that somehow we just fundamentally had a paradigm shift in how we do science and in how scientists collaborate, and in the incredible miracles of the technology that we can create when we really get all of this aligned to solve a problem. And so seeing, you know, the efficacy of a vaccine like this relative to the control is just such a phenomenal experience of wonder to me. And I think, you know, deeply reflects how wonder can cause us to restructure a lot of things that we know in really fundamental ways. And so with that, I think it's a really good introduction into one of sort of the deeper but most interesting to me dimensions of thinking about wonder as it relates to education or science engagement, is that on a certain level, awe or wonder, and depending on which researchers you talk to, they do sometimes define these emotions slightly differently, but that somewhere in here, these emotions are destabilizing. And that, you know, in this paraphrased version here, how might awe relate to religious conviction on the one hand and to scientific inquiry on the other? Awe is elicited by something vast, either physically or metaphorically, that is difficult to understand, such as the vastness of the night sky. As a result, awe stimulates processes of accommodation in which existing mental schemata are revised to make sense of the awe-inspiring stimulus. Because accommodation can be difficult or unsuccessful, awe straddles the border between positive and negative, provoking a sense of wonder, but also one of powerlessness and uncertainty. And I think this is a really interesting dimension to think about when we offer for the people we're engaging with these emotional experiences, and then think about, you know, how do we move through this emotional experience as one of accommodating to new information and not leaving people feeling powerless or uncertain. And in some listening to Brene Brown, some of her work, she suggests that an opposite to wonder is fear. which is really interesting to contemplate, even when we think about things like vaccine hesitancy, that we can feel both the wonder of this process, and we know that many people feel fear around that exact same new knowledge. And so it's a really interesting way to think about and embrace the many ways that people emotionally respond to these experiences, and how we as people creating or sharing or disseminating these scientific experiences can engage really authentically with all that comes with experiencing these scientific emotions. So we're going to dive into some frameworks for wonder as an emotion of science, and I'll try to do that quickly. We're a few minutes behind, and I want to give you guys time to dive into these. And we share these frameworks as opportunities to think about different ways that some researchers have thought about wonder, not that all of them will provide usefulness or that everyone has to be incorporated into your work in some way. You might find some are more resonant than others. And so after we're done, hopefully we'll still have a little time. We'll ask you to go into the slides and add some comments following any of the models that you have comments to share. So one possible progression here is saying, when we experience a first encounter and we move through this scientific emotion process, it might start with an awakening of senses, which builds a growth of wonder and leads to marveling, followed by curiosity, and then finding an activity to seek causes. And that will ultimately lead to the development of a scientific explanation. And so this would lead to sort of thinking about several steps of an emotional progression that one might move through after experiencing an initial awe-inspiring event. So this is where you could add comments about that first model. Another model is suggesting that wonder may be evoked in multiple ways throughout a scientific process, and that maybe there's different dimensions as we move through different parts of a scientific observation, identifying evidence, investigation, evaluation, etc., that we might be wondering in different ways throughout. And some of these questions might lead to some of those different entry points for emotions and for wondering throughout. And here's place to add comments for those. A third model builds a bit on, what are we talking about when we're talking about this emotion of wonder, and really clearly articulates that this emotion of wonder, or this evoking of wonder, might involve both an emotional component, such as astonishment or admiration, the wait, what, the whoa, the cool, the no way, all of these sorts of emotional introductions. And that is coupled, when it's specifically wonder, when it's specifically diving deep into this sort of structural rearrangement or this deep connection to this new idea, it comes with a cognitive component, which is proposed here as awareness. And some of these might be articulated as things like awareness that one's knowledge is incomplete or mistaken, awareness that there's more to be learned, awareness that some phenomena exist, awareness of unexpected connections, and awareness of the beauty of nature. And so some of these might allow for that learning to happen. This is where we move from just having an emotional experience to really having an educational, a knowledge-based shift. And then finally, a model here that addresses a little bit the idea of awe or wonder being a destabilizing emotion is a trajectory proposed here where upon an unexpected event, you might feel surprise. You might then analyze and evaluate that event. You might decide that that wasn't actually all that unexplainable, and you can accommodate it within your existing knowledge structures, and they remain unchanged. Or maybe upon analysis and evaluation of the event, you identify that there is a gap in your knowledge. You fill that gap. The knowledge structures themselves remain unchanged, but you've added this additional piece of knowledge within your existing schema. Or you may realize that this gap in knowledge reveals an uncertainty, that it's unreconciled by the current knowledge that you have, and you have to dig deeper. And in this model, they refer to that as awe. And that awe can lead to then new structures that are developed to accommodate the new knowledge. And so we just offer these because we find them kind of interesting to think about different ways that emotions and learning and scientific engagement might come together in different ways. And so we'd like to offer you maybe about 5 minutes to just independently in the document that we shared. I'll put it into the chat again if you closed it. That on those notes pages for any of those slides, we'd love to see your comments, your questions, where you see these models maybe resonating with some of the work that you do. All right, it's so fun to see all of your notes popping up into the document. I hope you have a moment also to look at what some others have shared. Anybody want to very quickly share a key thing while we send you back out to your breakout rooms? All right, so we're going to send you into the breakout rooms. We'll send you back with those who you were in before. And you can start the subsequent slides, each have a question on them. You can go into the slide with the question for your group number. And then if you're done, you can move to the 4th question or to another question that your group wants to discuss or anywhere else you want to take this conversation. We'll come back with about 5 to 7 minutes left and get a very quick summary of some of your takeaways.
Yeah, I was in a breakout room too, and our question revolved around sustaining learners, how you can support learners across that progression of mental reorganization. And my group, we gravitated around Model 4, and what we really focused on is time constraints, right? So you have to keep in mind how long of a time frame you're going to have with your participants or learners in order to allow them to fully move through those steps of awe and wonder. And that openly talking with learners about any emotions they're experiencing during the different stages, especially when it comes to overcoming difficulties or failures, if they're trying to figure out a problem, solve something, and reassure them that, hey, that's what learning is all about. And that's especially what science learning is all about. And getting that across to them will help them the next time they're learning something new in science.
Thank you. Other reflections? I know we lost some people, but if anybody else wants to share.
Well, our focus was on the supports. What are supports that need to be in place for Wonder and Awe? And we sort of talked about the difficulty of having prescriptive programs or lesson plans that inspire awe, because you just don't know what's going to hit any individual student at any given time. And you don't necessarily know what's going to grow and then become wonder and awe later away from you. And so how do you measure that? And so we had some talks. I don't know that we really talked about specific the models, but we sort of talked about what are ways that you can create evidence that you've inspired wonder and awe, and how do you and trying to get your institution to frame the goal of your program to inspire it, as opposed to, we will increase, we will have this many more children who say they want to enter the STEM workforce. And so it's a bit of a difficult target to hit, but maybe open-ended lesson plans and just getting teachers more comfortable, or our grad students more comfortable with sort of open-ended inquiry, and without, you're not trying to get to a clear answer with this science problem, you're trying to get the kids questioning, and the questioning leads to the discovery, the awe of discovery.
I guess I can quickly go over, I think our thing was, do we see points of entry to foster emotions of wonder and awe around science among learners in your programs? Where do you find wonder, and where do you think they can find wonder? So you're also talking about, like, in our experiences, So Rafaela, I believe you pronounce her name. I was talking about like giving students like TED Talk videos to invoke like discussions based on like the on wonder from the videos that they're looking at, doing like basic, I won't say basic science, but things like experiments with us using eggs with osmosis, so they're seeing something happening in real time, or even things like making sourdough bread, right? They're seeing this thing happening and there's so much science behind it. And that has actually triggered wonder and awe for their students, where they're like, oh, I didn't even know that's a thing. And then they began baking and, thinking about baking and science in one. Also being flexible with students' experiences. So thinking about like something that invokes on wonder for you may not invoke on wonder for someone else. So keeping that in mind, focusing on observation. So just having students go out and see what's around and what like, that they're excited about or they're like wondering about. And I kind of like put a tree, yeah, like your silkworms. I put a tree in the doc on page 33 about something that invoked wonder for me. I'm like, oh, the first thing I see are like molecules, right? And so I'm like, what kind of tree is this? And just like diving into like, science is not just this thing, but also talking about how do we combine, there's still standards set in school systems. So how do we combine invoking the on wonder with the fun stuff and, thinking about the process and not the end result, but also being able to meet the standards that we can't dismantle at the moment because we're only educators. So thinking about like, especially now thinking about people with the pandemic where they're confused. They don't understand how the process of science work. It's like, you said something 6 months ago, you're saying something else now, you're gonna tell me something else 3 months later. So what you're saying isn't true because no one has really been taught the process of science. So thinking about those ways to introduce students to science in a way that invokes wonder.
All right, well, we are at 3 p.m. Thank you everyone for sharing your perspectives. And Courtney, I'm happy to email you the information once I get it from DeSanne and Odellis regarding our silkworm dealer. But yeah, it's been an awesome conversation. I will just add, I'm the only person that's met somebody. No, I met another person who's done this where I met somebody in a parking lot where I exchanged cash for Queen's ants. Before one other person has done that. So I feel that. Anyway, this was a great conversation. Please do follow up with myself or DeSanne or Odellis about any of this moving ahead. We hope that this helped to sort of think about some of the ways that we are valuing the teaching and learning of science. Sort of like move less towards the utility and more towards the wonder is what we're hoping to explore as true models moving ahead. So yeah, we'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat. And DeSanne, please, if you want to take us out.
Yep. Thank you all. I put our email addresses in the chat. You also have them in the slide deck, and you can continue to take a look at people's notes. And I hope this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end.